Hi, it's Terry Gross, host of Fresh Air. Hey, take a break from the 24-hour news cycle with us and listen to long-form interviews with your favorite authors, actors, filmmakers, comedians, and musicians, the people making the art that nourishes us and speaks to our times. So listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.
Seattle's punk scene in the 90s left a big impression on a whole lot of people, including Sasha, taqว์šəblu, LaPointe. Bands like Bikini Kill were angry about things like sexual violence and oppression, just like she was, and they yelled about it, made music about it. But the punk scene was also very white, like a lot of the spaces around Sasha. And as a Coast Salish punk, she wanted space to be her. All of her. I'm Katie Campbell, and you're listening to a bonus episode of Meet Me Here, KUOW's Arts and Culture podcast. The KUOW Book Club read Sasha's latest book, Thunder Song, in March, and I sat down with her on March 23rd in front of a live audience at the Seattle Central Library to talk about being a punk, reconnecting to salmon, and following in the footsteps of her iconic great-grandmother, taqว์šəblu Hilbert. Sasha kicked things off for us with a reading about her great-grandmother.
I will read a short excerpt from Thunder Song, but I have started implementing a new practice in my readings. I try to do this every time I get invited to a space to read, and that is to share a quick poem from another Indigenous baddie poet. And this is a poem by the incredible No'u She is a badass activist, educator, writer, and this comes from her book, Ask the Brindled. When you say protesters instead of protectors, by No'u I would call it a trick if it wasn't so terrifying. The way your mouth doesn't move when you speak, your smile, shiny as a church. But what kind of prayer could ever be trusted without evidence of a free tongue? On the rare occasion, sound shakes loose. Words, no matter how unmuzzled, words still go to die. In your mouth, even womb is wound. Sometimes I dream of tearing your throat wide open and finding there where stories should be born, only bleeding, bleeding, bleeding. The wish to desecrate. We are, yet again, portrayed by you, the girl, the native, the water, the mountain who was asking for it. Your lips so Sunday still. Sometimes I almost believe you, so it's best I keep hiding knives in my hair the way my grandmother, not God, the way my grandmother intended. So that was No'u from Ask the Brindled. She's one of my favorite poets on earth. And I'll just read a short excerpt from Thunder Song. In 2006, I watched my great-grandmother address a sold-out crowd at Seattle's Benaroya Hall. She climbed the wooden steps of the stage, her small frame draped in her wool shawl, and I watched as her father's painted drum was handed to a percussionist in the orchestra. My great-grandmother, my namesake, turned and addressed the audience. She spoke about the first people of this land. She talked about a need for healing. People, she said, her heart breaking for a wounded world, have lost their way. Her father's drum sounded. The first powerful beat reverberated like thunder. 14 years later, my mom sits at her desk, a mosaic of script pages laid around her. She's studying the opening scenes, the interviews, and the movements of the music. She's finalizing what will become the documentary of Grandma's Symphony. She looks up from her tiles and tells me, "This must happen now. People need to hear this music again." The footage for the documentary has sat unused, dormant for all these years, until now. That spring, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, police officers murdered George Floyd in the streets of Minneapolis, protests erupted around the country, and cop cars burned in the streets of Seattle. My great-grandmother was 83 years old when she commissioned the healing heart of the first people of this land. She had been troubled by the world. Back then, in 2001, the news was all about George W. Bush's war on terror. She saw beyond the fear. She saw a country divided, the wars across the ocean, and the violent injustices in her own streets. She saw that the people had lost their way. She believed so deeply in our people's stories, the teachings inherent within them. She knew that no one would listen to an old Indian woman, that she would have to reach another way. Somehow, she arrived at what she called highbrow music, symphonies. This came as a shock to us. Great-grandmother hadn't grown up with this kind of stuff. She loved square dancing and Elvis. But she believed this was the way, that if all people could experience our beliefs through song, the music could heal the wound. She was hoping for medicine, for a world that could change.
I'm so glad you started by reading that about your great-grandmother, because I wanted to acknowledge your namesake, who is a huge presence throughout this book, Vi taqʷšəblu Hilbert. You dedicated the book to her and wrote at the very top, quote, "This book is for her and for anyone who is ready to listen." And I think we are ready to listen. Are y'all ready to listen? Yeah? Okay, come on. Thank you. Thank you very much. But Sasha, do you think the world has listened?
Not nearly enough. I am so grateful for all of y'all and anyone who is. And my grandma would be bossy and would be like, we need to make everybody listen. I am less bossy, but I'm working on it. Like her vision was to reach as many people as she could with our Coast Salish teachings in these songs to inspire them to be better. But when I look around the world and see these injustices and see what's happening to our oceans and our waterways and our land, and people are still having to defend sacred sites. Children and families are being like torn apart. My own best friend who's coming to visit from the Northwest Territories, she's Gwich'in. She's coming to visit in a week, and she's actually scared as a Gwich'in woman. She says ICE is going to be at SeaTac, and that's terrifying. So when I look around and I see those things, and I see Black and brown and trans bodies still being murdered and facing violence, when I see tribes still having to fight so hard to defend sacred sites from being demolished, when I see tribes still have to fight so hard just to be federally recognized, no, I don't think enough people are listening.
You talk about how she felt that no one would listen to this old Indian woman. Do you feel that you've gotten different kinds of people maybe to stop and listen by continuing the work in things like Thundersong?
I hope so, because when I came to Thundersong, it was real wild. I had crazy names for it, like in these early raw stages. I was just having fun with it. I was like, the whole thing's going to be a mixtape, and it's going to look like the book cover's going to be a tape. My poor editor was just like, uh-huh. And I was like, it's going to be in two parts, side A and side B. And in the early stages of it, it was way more music focused. But then, I just finished and kind of clawed my way out of the swamp of sadness that was writing red paint. Proud of that book. It's a powerful book, but I'm definitely very raw and honest when I say that was I literally clawed my, that swamp that Atreyu and Artax are in, and Artax drowns. That's where I was for 3/4 of writing that book, but I got through it, clawed my way out of that, and just wanted to kind of look outward rather than inward. I wanted to observe and write essays about things that brought me joy or interested me, rather than being so introspective. I wanted to observe and be a different kind of storyteller. But it just so happens when I clawed my way out of the swamp of sadness, the world was on fire. People were being murdered. A pandemic was happening all around us. And as a Native woman who's descended from people who survived the smallpox epidemic, the pandemic had us shook in a different way, So the world's on fire, people are being murdered, and there's no justice for it. And we're losing our elders due to this pandemic. I was like, okay, I'm going to shift away from my cute little mixtape idea. We'll just table that, and maybe I'll come to it in a few years. But I started to think of my great-grandma's work and how she felt. And it was so linked, because I could have just gotten swallowed by the darkness, gone into the swamp of sadness. But I thought, what would grandma do? Which is something I do daily, all the time. Grandma wouldn't just be away with the fairies and write a million essays and poems about Nirvana and Sonic Youth and what they meant to you. no, you're not going to do that. You have something way more important to do right now. And the essay collection just completely shifted, and I knew immediately that I wanted to write. And that's why the title essay is Thunder Song, after her, after that symphony, because that's what got it started. I think I got so far away from your question. I'm sorry.
No, it was perfect, and it's led me down the right path, because I want to talk more about how your great-grandmother influenced you, and we came to this, and I hope one day we have this world that deserves the mixtape story, because that sounds awesome, and I would definitely read a side A and side B. I think everybody here...
It was a good idea.
It was a good idea. I think we would all love some essays about Nirvana. But, I mean, your great-grandmother was an incredible woman and expected you to be incredible. And you write about people recognizing you as Vi's namesake, sometimes first, before they recognize you. What was it like to grow up with that kind of expectation to sometimes be a namesake first and Sasha second?
I love this question. I know I write about it a little bit in Red Paint, but at the naming ceremony, I was just this little nugget running around causing trouble. And I remember all of my uncles and aunties saying, oh, taqʷšəblu number 2, what hard shoes to fill. And being such a young kid, I didn't know what they meant. And then as I grew older into teenagehood, I was kind of like, oh, that's too much. I'm not a language warrior. I'm not a storyteller. So it's been with me around my entire life. I don't know, as a namesake, we were very, very close. I was low-key obsessed with my grandma growing up. Other kids would be goofing around and running in the woods, and I would just be at her feet like a cat, just waiting for more stories. I was the nerdy grandkid. But during harder times in my life, when I was a teenage brat and teenage runaway, which if y'all have read the books, you know how dark that gets. But I remember coming home to visit her. It was Christmas, and all the family members were there having a party, and everyone was being kind of, oh, hi, Sasha, it's good to see you. At this point, I'm not living at home, rarely see my family. I was in a bad way. I was as my dad likes to say, oh, when you were off being all crazy. And that's all he says about it. And I'm like, fair, Dad, fair. I came back eventually. But no one was really acknowledging anything. And I'm sitting next to, my 70-year-old grandma, who is this iconic matriarch of our family, iconic storyteller. And I've got a shaved head with blue lipstick and probably a latex skirt from that goth store on Broadway that used to be there. Just appropriate 15-year-old attire, for a Christmas event.
Totally.
And everyone else is just kind of light and bubbly, making small talk. And I sat down by Grandma, and she just took one look at me and was like, granddaughter, I can't see you. You're behind a veil. Oh. And I was I put down my toast or whatever it was. I was like, what? And she was like, you need to come back. Oh. And then she got up and walked away. And I was and left me with that. And she could just know. And that Christmas, she gifted me her old typewriter that she used to do her first language work on. And I hadn't even told her I wanted to be a writer yet. At that point, I was like, no, I'm going to run away to Seattle and be a rock journalist, But we hadn't talked about that. Those were all the words she said. And then she gifted me this giant, clunky, beautiful, it sits in my office today, typewriter that she used to do her first language work on. And that happened again and again in my out there being all crazy years. She would just kind of reel me back in and put me back on the path. And no one else in my life really could accomplish that. My parents tried, maybe friends and aunties tried, but Grandma had a way of steering me back and kind of reminding me, you have a very important purpose. And I'd be like, is that just because you named me after you? And she was like, yes. She kept it real. But as I grew older, I came to really appreciate that and came to be really inspired by her. And she's the reason I decided to, in my mid-20s, leave Seattle and attend the Institute of American Indian Arts. I had a crossroads. One, I'm not kidding, this is not hyperbole, was to go join the circus and go on tour. I am not kidding. My life was weird in my 20s. So I was trying to weigh this decision, got invited to join the circus, and then my grandparents sent me this pamphlet, go to college. It's a tribal art college. You could study writing there. And I weighed my options, and even though Grandma had already passed, I chose that. So she's sort of been her name and her spirit have been guiding me and the decisions I make since I was a teenager.
Grandmas just know sometimes, or grandfathers for some folks. But I wrote down, because I really loved how you said this, language warrior. That is phenomenal, and I'm stealing that. The headline for our talk now is already written. Talk more about being a language warrior, what it meant to your great-grandmother and what it means to you.
It's hard to know how privileged you are when you're in it. And by privilege, I think you can be privileged in many different ways. Our family grew up very poor, moved around a lot, ended up eventually in a single wide trailer in the woods in Swinomish. So when I use the word privilege, know that it is more of like a cultural privilege. And it's hard looking back, having the language around me. I was just like immersed in it. She had this beautiful room in her Seattle basement called the Brain Room. And I was just a little ass kid running around with my cousins being crazy, as you do, getting into trouble, like poking into rooms you're not supposed to poke through. But every time we'd run through go cannonballing through the house, we'd get to the Brain Room and we knew it was serious. Everything got quiet. All the grown-ups would look at us. I'd be like, oh, we have to back up. And then we'd exit, because that's where she did all of her early language work. She'd be in there with her amazing language students. She was teaching language at that point already at the UW. And so all of her lesson plans were written and built there. All of her transcriptions were done there. And to me, I guess what I'm saying when I mention privilege is, since I was born, I've heard Lushootseed spoken around me. At every family gathering, Grandma would always address us first in Lushootseed, then in English. We'd gather around the fire at salmon bakes, and she would share stories. I thought this was just normal. I thought every kid got this. And when I grew older, I came to appreciate it so hard that not every Native child gets to grow up with their language. And so I look at it as such a gift. And I think the things that she has done for language revitalization for the Lushootseed language is so important. We have full immersion programs now. I have little cousins, nieces, and nephews who can come up and speak full Lushootseed fluently, and I almost tear up because they have full immersion classes. We didn't have that. My generation, our siblings, we don't speak fluent Lushootseed. It's a great deal of shame that I carry. I will fix it. I know several phrases. I'm learning slowly, but I think that idea of looking back, she was a language warrior. She went around and recorded elders, the last fluent folks, and then of course had a ton of help from Tom Hess and other linguists, and a team of dedicated people that helped her bring the Lushootseed language into written form. And now, so many tribes are doing, and in different dialects, there's Northern Lushootseed and Southern Lushootseed. It's just really beautiful to see. And so she's definitely a language warrior. And then I guess, I did just admit to y'all that I am not a fluent speaker, so I can't really call myself a language warrior yet, but I have been learning and having tiny lessons here and there with my mom, especially when I knew I wanted to start incorporating it into my poetry. I bug my mom so much. I'll be in the middle of writing, it's 10 at night, and I'll have to call her up and I'll be like, Mom, how do you say this? She's she is a treasure. So I'm baby stepping towards language warrior. Maybe by the next book, I'll be one.
I would argue you're already there, but that's for you to decide for yourself. And you may not be fluent, but you have some, really important words that you say. You talk about in the book in a later essay, how the first time you say "I love you" to your partner is in Lushootseed. Can you talk about why the difference and its own power compared to this English that we speak on this land now?
Yeah. Oh, I love this question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Not enough people ask about this particular essay, and I want more people to ask about this essay because it was a really beautiful one for me to write. What I appreciate about our language is that there are so many different ways to say I love you, meaning different kinds of love. And that just appealed to me so much on a deep, deep level as someone coming from surviving sexual violence at an early age, surviving sexual assault, throughout my life at different times. The phrase I love you is a really tricky thing for me. I don't love it. It doesn't come out easily. It comes out kind of clunky. And when I was first falling in love with my partner, I didn't want to say it. I was like, no, that's scary. It's loaded for me. And my mom and I walking down Swan Creek one day, she was wearing a shirt. I was like, oh, what does your shirt say? And she said, oh, shibitsi chud. It means I love you. And I was like, it means I love you? She was like, yeah, but not in a romantic way. It means I have compassion for you. I care for you. And of course, there is different ways that you can say, I desire you. I have romantic love for you in Lashutseed, which is great. And I do desire my partners. But like, it's important for me that unconditional love, that compassion felt at times in my life the way I wanted to communicate it, that felt safe for me. And I really love our language, because in the English language, I love you just translates to one thing. And I think the idea of loving someone is so complex. And we love at different degrees, and we love with different desires. And so the fact that our language provides different ways to say it made my little, trauma baby heart feel so at home. And so the first time I ever said it to my partner, I said it in Lashutseed.
That's amazing.
Pan dulce comes in hundreds of shapes, sizes, and flavors. But one Seattle bakery is reimagining the Mexican sweetbreads with Pacific Northwest ingredients. Hey, I'm Brandy Fullwood, host of Seattle Eats. On the latest episode, Seattle Times food writer Bethany Jean Clement gives us some inside tips to build the perfect pastry box from a local panaderia. Listen to Seattle Eats on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.
I think there's also very clearly love for music in this book. It might not have been the mixtape you were planning originally, but the impact music has had in your life and your love in some form or fashion for it comes through so clearly. Like when you talk about the Bikini Kill song, White Boy, which I was like jamming to on the bus on the way here because I wanted to get in the right mindset for this.
You're an angel.
And your first book, Red Paint, the ancestral autobiography of a Coast Salish punk, has a lot to do with you finding punk music and the punk scene specifically here in Seattle. What was it about punk in particular that pulled you in and made you want to be, as you call it, a reservation riot girl?
I love this question, and I love that you were blasting White Boy. It is the best Bikini Kill song ever.
It's really good.
You are like my best friend now. Like, you were so cool. I think what first drew me in, growing up very isolated in the woods, 40 minutes from Bellingham and over an hour from Seattle, where music was actually happening. So it felt like this out of reach sort of mythic thing to me. I would steal my brother's boombox. They'd get real pissed about this. And we only had like one crummy little Sony boombox. And I would lock myself in the bathroom, our little linoleum, yellow single wide trailer bathroom, for hours trying to learn how to make mixtapes. And I made the worst tapes, cut songs off too much, or I'd have the song on 3 times because I'd get excited that it came on again. But I was listening to alternative radio stations. I like that you brought up White Boy, because that was the first time I was I was hearing things like Nirvana and the Wipers and Soundgarden, and I was like, what is this? This is awesome. But the first time I heard Bikini Kill's White Boy, it absolutely eviscerated me. And I was like, what is this? And it really kind of blew my mind open in that tiny bathroom about, here's this woman singing in sing-song, cheerleader, girly girl, and then going into this guttural scream. And I was like, oh my God, I found my people. She's speaking my language. And I also hadn't heard songs that are talking about sexual violence, sexual assault, rape, and the anger that we're allowed to have over these things. I was really young, and it was my first experience of that. And then it was over. I was cooked. I was done. I was like, I want to be punk. I didn't know that we could talk about the things that happen to our bodies in such an empowering way. I was a child. And so in a lot of ways, that saved me and sort of set me on the trajectory of starting to hitchhike. I'd go up to Bellingham and go to shows at the Show Off Gallery. I would hitch rides to Seattle and go to Deviate and the Rock Candy. I just became very, very enamored. But it all started with that little spark in the bathroom where I was like, I get to be angry about what happened to my body. Holy shit.
Yeah. The space to have this rage that was also art, it sounded like was huge. But what was really knife to the heart reading Thundersong and Red Paint was that the world that you found yourself in for yourself wasn't perfect, because much like the song was called White Boy, there was a lot of white boys in that space and a lot of white women, right? And you talk at length about just how white it was and still is. And on page 83, you write, eventually this idea that I was a punk first and a native person second became unbearable. And I asked earlier about being a namesake first and you second. So now you're also talking about having to be punk first and native second. I mean, when you have all of these identities within yourself competing to be like the first spot, how do you find you? And how do you define, like, I am Sasha taqʷšəblu LaPointe, damn it?
Great question. I'm not sure I have that answer yet. I think it's always changing, right?
Fair.
We grow, because this is an excellent example as a teenager, finally arriving to these places I had only like daydreamed about and being like, yeah, I'm here. I'm gonna like crowd surf and mosh and drink beer behind the alley. Sorry, Mom, if you're listening. Wasn't all the time. And go see these incredible bands and hear like spoken word, and saw zines for the first time. Like, I was enamored completely and inspired. And then after a while, something did happen and shift in me, kind of taking a moment, and it's changed since then. And I'm so happy. But the punk scene I kind of fell into in the late 90s, early 2000s, I started looking around the room and I started becoming uncomfortable because I was like, where are the other Native folks? I didn't see one Native person in the crowd. And then I started like clocking that a lot. And that's not to dismiss some of the very rad bands that I saw growing up, singing about, oppression, fighting against, like singing about stuff that mattered. But then I wanted more. I was like, where are the Coast Salish punks? Where are the Coast Salish riot girls? Why isn't there a scene on my res that deeply needed it, like someone passing out pamphlets on self-defense and how to get home safely? And so I started to kind of be like, oh, is this really for me? And that sort of started this inner conflict. And then I just started seeking them out. And at art school, I met Native punks and Native goth bands. And I think the scene has changed massively since I was a teenager. Now I see Native punks and way more like queer punks. And yeah.
Well, it's funny that you say earlier that you're not quite a language warrior, because I think you probably had something to do with that change, right? Because you were a part of the band Medusa Stare, and this is a thing you dreamed of for years. I remember reading Red Paint and this moment of triumph when these women come to you and they're like, we like your work and we want to make work with you. And the music that you created, got to be the music you were looking for. What do you feel like you were able to say that the punks that came before you and after you couldn't voice?
Being in Medusa Stare was such an amazing opportunity. It was wild. It was like so dreamy. Got to play in all these like rowdy venues, and we toured from Seattle to Boston and, doing shows, breaking down as you do along the way. And it was such a beautiful experience to also feel in community with these folks. Having dated and been married to a person in a band that it was not my band, right? I would go on tour, I'd help out, but I was just like, helping selling merch. It wasn't really a role. And I was like, you know what, I'm tired of this. So it was a different vibe. It felt more like community with all of us. It felt like family, and also the opportunity to have a voice on stage. And so I performed spoken word and eventually started doing backup vocals and eventually started incorporating my traditional language into those. And that, I think, is what the biggest gift Medusa Stare gave me, was like, here is the Coast Salish punk that I was aching for growing up. And they allowed me the space to step up and do that for a while. And it was really, really beautiful. And I think one of my favorite nights on tour, these two young Indigenous femme folks came up to me and they were just like, we're Indigenous too, and we want to start a band. I was like, my heart was exploding. I was like, excuse me while I cry. But I'm going to hide it because I'm tough. I think that was one of my favorite experiences that happened with Medusa Stare. And I was like, yes, please go start a band. I will come see you.
It also felt like, from reading your essays anyway, it was this opportunity to like force the whiteness of the scene to recognize like you don't get to own this all by yourselves. And after telling such a beautiful story, I hate to ask you to recount this story, but I wonder if you would mind telling the story about the women outside the venue in Chicago who tried to get you and your band booted off of the ticket, because this had me like on the floor, like, dear God, women who look like me, what are we doing?
Oh no! Don't apologize for this question, because I get fired up about this question.
Hell yeah, let's go.
And it actually is like a joyous moment. I don't know if folks in the audience can tell, but I'm a just inherently anxious person. Anxiety disorder, it's so fun. So I'm just nervous in general, a little twitchy, a little like, So I had run in. We were there hours before the show was going to start, and I like squirreled away into a little bathroom to like do my ritual, put on my makeup, whisper to myself, and like take deep breaths, all the weird shit you do when you have anxiety. And my bandmates were outside in front and overheard these two very nice, very white women arguing about, I can't believe she would do that. Why is she wearing like war paint? It's so disrespectful to like all Native Americans. And my band is sitting in the van, like tuning guitars, smoking cigarettes, and hearing that it's a hot Chicago night. They're hearing it all. And I guess the conversation escalated to them just championing like all Native Americans. They're like, let's get them off the bill. We should go talk to the owner of the venue right now, because that is not right. And then our lead singer threw open the van door, and just so tough. Like, I felt like my band really had my back that night. Threw open the van door and said, she's Coast Salish, not that it's any of your business. And you can ask her why she wears the red paint, but that's also certainly none of your business, because it's part of her culture. And then just like stamped her cigarette out, and they all filed in. And I was like, I wish I could have seen it. You guys probably look like the biggest, punkest bullies in the sweetest way. And for the rest of the night, I saw the girls looking a little sheepish at me and confused. They were like, you don't look Native. Like, I could see their like wheels turning, and it's like, yeah, I've been told that. Like, you don't look white, but you don't look Indian. Are you Asian? Like, I could just see them, like, their minds melting. And I was like, yeah, have you ever seen a mixed heritage Coast Salish person? Do you want me to pull out my CIB? Like, because I will, like, if you come for me. But we laughed about it on the drive back to the wherever we're going after Chicago, because they thought they were doing something so good, right? And at least there's that. Like, let's not be culturally appropriative anymore. If a non-Native person wanted to wear regalia, I'd have problems with that. I feel like most people would find that disrespectful. So I feel like the girls' hearts were in the right place, but they needed to do a little more work, because that whole thing, thank God my band shut them down, but like, if they had successfully gotten us kicked off the bill, how bad would they have felt? Like, you kicked a Native woman off a platform in which she was going to speak. Good job. So that's a fun story.
The complete opposite of what they like claim to be trying to represent. And it's just like, I think it speaks to you as a person that both in the book and now you're giving them this grace of like, well, their hearts were in the right place. And I'm like, no, I don't like these people. I mean, you're so open about so much in this collection and in your first book, as you said, about sexual violence that you've lived through, learning to find partners that you feel really safe with and with whom you can share and celebrate your queer and two-spirit identity. And on pages 173 to 174, you talk about wearing, quote, my sexuality, my identity as a queer person, as a high femme person, loud and proud. How did you find that space to wear that identity loud and proud and be able to fight for yourself?
I'm going to take us back to the almost ran away with the circus era, something I haven't written a lot about. Things were weird in my 20s, but I was having the best time. We performed with folks from Circus Contraption. We had this little ragtag burlesque troupe. We got to perform at like the Can and the Pink Door and other venues around Seattle. And it was just me and a gang of girls just like in full like glittery glam, like drag every night, having the time of our lives, but like dancing to like Nick Cave and like weird stuff. And we were like a very dark circus burlesque troupe. And it was a safe place for me to explore that, like, oh, I've never put on fake nails in my life. Like, I've never worn eyelashes or glittery lipstick. And it felt like this taboo thing growing up after surviving sexual assault. There was a time in my life where my pants were so big you couldn't see my shoes. It was the 90s. It was kind of the look. And just like hiding my body, because that's what I was told that, like, in media, in different instances, like, that will keep you safe. And I hated that. I was like, no. And that's another thing that drew me to Riot Grrrl. I know that it was a flawed movement, but it also did so much empowering things. Like, I have critique of it. I'm sure everyone does. But the part about, like, femme empowerment when I was 14 years old, still grappling with what had happened to me, that really, like, inspired me and said, no, if you want to wear a vinyl corset and claws and a pink bouffant wig and dance to the Cramps, girl, get it. Yeah. And so learning how to embrace my hyper-femininity and not be afraid of it, and not be afraid to, like, challenge anyone about who asks me about it or pushes, because to me it's just as tough as armor. During those burlesque years and then moving forward, I'm like kind of just embracing, like, high femme strength, and I do feel powerful in it. I also feel powerful in track pants and, like, a hoodie covered in cat hair, which, glamorous writer's life, that's really the look. Just, I think even in No Uravila's poem, the mountain that was asking for it, this idea that if young women present themselves a certain way, bad things are going to happen to them, has pissed me off since I was like 12 years old. So
now I want to talk about food, because like music, food plays a really important role in your life, especially salmon. But for a time, you were vegan and you didn't eat it. And you later described that decision as denying your, quote, salmon privilege, going back to privilege, as you mentioned. How did you reconnect with salmon, for folks who haven't read the book yet?
So I was trying very hard. Like, I went vegetarian when I was 11, to the annoyance of my parents. They were like, we're making chicken enchiladas tonight, honey. And I'm like, I can't eat that. My mom's like, great. How long is this vegetarian thing going to last? And I was like, I'm committed. Like, and I was vegetarian for many, many years. And then reconnecting with salmon is actually one of my favorite stories ever. My dear Uncle Ron, who's like, I loved him. I idolized him. He was this incredible artist, carver, dancer, and I thought he was the coolest dude on earth. One Christmas, I was dating, I think I just call him the drummer in the book. Yes. He doesn't get a name. And he was vegan, and so I think I was trying to be vegan. We were eating like tofuty cuties. Do you remember those? Do they still make those? But anyway, that Christmas where my cousins and I are all lined up at my uncle's car in the driveway in the snow, he's like, come on, kids, I've got your present in the back of my car. And we're like, what's in the back of your car? And then one by one, he just drops this massive king salmon in our hands. And I was just like, and look, future me or like present me wants to go back to past me and just slap her upside her head, be like, how dare you? Because right now, like, what a gift. But I just looked at him and I said, Uncle, I'm vegan. And he just looked at me for, it felt like a long time, saying nothing. And then he says, what kind of Indian are you? And just storms off. And then that was like existential crisis. Like 17-year-old Sasha or whatever was like, holy shit, I don't know. And so I took the salmon home, put it in the freezer, and then thought about it. I was like, well, I can't eat that because that would be breaking my... And I had this like inner back and forth, like this inner conflict for a couple days. And finally I just said, F it. I called my cousin Moss and I said, do you want to cook this salmon and eat it? So he got on the bus with his salmon in his backpack and like a 6-pack of like dark winter ale. And my other cousins came over and we all just hung out, cooked the salmon, and I ate it. And I was so stoked. And I feel like that was the first step in reconnecting me with salmon. I was hanging out with and I have mad respect for veganism and even vegetarianism. My diet is strange. I'm like, I eat traditional foods. Like, I have to ask my mom, like, my roommate came home with elk that she herself had hunted. And I like called my mom. I was like, Mom, did our ancestors eat elk? And she was like, duh. And I was like, I guess I'm eating elk tonight then. So it took a long time, but that, like my uncle dropping this like 50-pound massive king salmon into my like 17-year-old arms in the snow on Christmas stayed with me, like planted this seed that anytime I'd go to a vegan potluck after that or, vegan brunch, I'd be like, in the back of my head, girl, you are supposed to be eating fish. Like you come from salmon people. And so I made peace with that. And now I eat fish all the time.
Heck yeah.
Sustainably and wild caught, obviously. But that was a long journey of getting in touch with my identity. I'm allowed to be mixed heritage. I'm allowed to be Coast Salish. I'm allowed to be a punk. I'm allowed to eat salmon. It's like this overlap. So
yeah. Well, and it's again, like veganism can be such a white space too. That is in and of itself a lot of privilege to say, I will abstain from all of these different kinds of foods, and maybe to not think about the connection that people can have to a certain animal, a certain kind of meat, the salmon.
Right. And I brought my very vegan partner to one of our salmon ceremonies. They're one of my favorite to attend. They're really beautiful. It's a way that we honor our food. We honor the salmon. There's songs, there's like cedar boughs. They present the king salmon on a cedar plank with sword ferns. It's a really beautiful ceremony. And then it's a big feast. And I wanted to bring my partner. And I said, this is really part of my culture. I know that you don't have to eat the salmon, but like, it's a ceremony. And in my head, I was like, ooh, if he doesn't eat the salmon, this might not work. I was watching him and I was like, I know you're vegan. I respect that, but you're coming to a Coast Salish salmon ceremony. And when this nice elder handed him his plate, I was like side-eyeing him like a hawk. And he said, thank you, and took a bite. And I was like, to be respectful and to honor my culture and to honor that salmon that gave its life for us.
Yeah. Well, I have one more question, and I want to go back to what your uncle asked you in that moment when you said you wouldn't eat the salmon, and he said, what kind of Indian are you? What would you say to him today, Sasha?
I think it's actually at the end of, because I've thought about this for many, many years. And I love that you brought it up, because First Salmon Ceremony is like my second favorite essay in the book.
Yay.
Because I love food. And I hated ever having any shame around food in different ways, the way like being in predominantly white spaces. I brought my ex-husband's family fish dip that my grandma used to make, and I was so proud of it because I was only like 24. I didn't know what I was doing in the kitchen, but I learned how to make her fish dip that we always had growing up, and I was so proud of it. I unwrapped it, and it was like, ew, what's that smell? And like, I was like heartbroken and embarrassed. Because it's like my, new partner's mom tucked it away and hid it in the back of the fridge and like snacked on it in secret. I never want to feel that way again.
No, never.
I thought of it at the end of this essay. I guess I'm the kind of Indian who will never be vegan, who will never again teach herself to be hungry or quiet, the kind who will bring the smelly salmon dip into your white fridge. I am the kind of Indian who will always be bad at making fry bread, who loves picking berries and driving along the coast listening to dark wave and synth pop. I am the kind of Indian who will never hide who she is again and who will always eat the salmon as long as the salmon returns to us.
Oh, I love that. Let's give that a round of applause. Thank you. All right, I do have one final question for you, Sasha, because on page 223, you write, quote, "It's exhausting being inspiring, being strong. So I really hope I haven't exhausted you tonight."
No.
Okay, good. Okay, so maybe a better question then is just, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How is life?
I love that quote though, because you just like sent me back in time. Like I just had a ratatouille moment. I was like zapped back into sitting on the stairs at Evergreen. I had just started, and Tay Tibble, the Maori poet who I adore, was coming to visit me. We were doing some readings together, and she came out of the goodness of her heart to talk with my creative writing class, and they loved her. Like 3-hour session, like da-da-da-da-da, like ideas flying. It was super great. We talked about really heavy stuff. We talked about like assimilation, colonialism, genocide, all the fun stuff you talk about in an Indigenous writing class. But it was such a good session, and we went out onto the deck, like the stairwell, and we're both just vaping into the night. And I just remember it so clearly. We were like, oh, that was great. And then, because I think in that moment I was trying to say it is so important to do this work and to have these conversations, but we were both kind of cracking up about it's also exhausting. So just blowing like cherry rainbow vape cloud into the beautiful Pacific Northwest to deal with it. But how am I doing now? I'm okay. I work at the Native Pathways program, which is super awesome. It's like such a gift to be able to be teaching like emerging Native writers. Teaching is like super rad, and I think also just keeps you busy. And I'm just trying to like find time. Like I need to apply for some residencies. I have kiddos living at the house now, which is a massive change. So it's like, I'm good, but I'm just trying to find time to write, which is like the most boring writer answer ever. No. Everyone says it, but like, that's the only thing I'm trying to figure out.
It's deeply relatable.
Okay, good.
But it sounds, again, I'm really going to emphasize, it sounds like you are a language warrior in your own way, Sasha.
Thank you.
And thank you for all of your work, your writing, your music, teaching the next generation. And most importantly, thank you for being with us this evening. Sasha taqʷšəblu LaPointe, author of Thunder Song. Yeah. Give it up.
And thank you for listening to this bonus episode of Meet Me Here. I spoke to Sasha for a KUOW Book Club live event in partnership with the Seattle Public Library on March 23rd. Our next author will be Molly Olguin. Molly will join me at the Seattle Central Library on April 23rd to talk about her short story collection, The Sea Gives Up the Dead. You can RSVP at kuow.org/events. And don't forget to join the KUOW Book Club at kuow.org/books. Meet Me Here is produced by KUOW, a proud member of the NPR network. It's hosted by me, Katie Campbell, Dyer Oxley, and Jeannie Yandel, and it's produced by Brandy Fullwood, Kyle Norris, and Matt Martin. Our editor is Phyllis Fletcher. You can find more and support the show at kuow.org/meet. I'm Katie Campbell, and I'll meet y'all back here for our next regularly scheduled episode on Wednesday.
Seattle Now is your one-stop shop for local news, twice a day, every weekday. We give you a deep dive into a story for your morning routine and a roundup of the day's top stories for your commute home, and some laughs every Friday. Hosted by me, Patricia Murphy, and Paige Browning. Start and end your day with Seattle Now on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.